and of course they're teaching totally different things, which is really, in a way, one of the reasons I think these days to call anything Ericksonian hypnosis is almost kind of weird, because what is that?
Yeah.
Erickson never certified anybody. He didn't have a certification course, and now you are a certified Ericksonian hypnotist. So, in a way, it's almost silly to say that, okay, I'm qualified to tell you that, or so-and-so is qualified to make you an Ericksonian hypnotist. It's almost silly. I think neo-Ericksonian hypnosis is a much better, more accurate term, because Erickson's been gone for 30-some-odd years now, right? And people are teaching their versions of what he's doing, but if we're lucky, we get a working model of something that works well. But if we're really going to be doing anything, we should be building on that and getting, in a sense, past where Erickson left off. Taking the learnings of Bandler and Grinder, who, by the way, were not the most popular people in Erickson's book. He thought they missed a lot, and they probably did miss a lot.
Surely
but they
not.
also saw a lot and noticed a lot. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, absolutely. So when you first get started, you try to learn from the people that are at the top of their game, and for a lot of people, when they get started and they see their first few clients, there's always those times when things don't go exactly the way that they'd hoped. And when you were first starting, how did you really cope with that? Did you have a lot of mentors, or do you have a way of coping, or do you just freak out?
I mostly just freaked out. Yeah, thank you. Freaked out and called an ambulance. No, I'm serious. All kidding aside, it is probably the best thing that ever happens to a person was once you get out of the artificial environment of the classroom and start with a person who doesn't care about NLP or hypnosis. They just want to, quit biting their nails, or they want to get over this, panic feeling whenever they're in a high place, or fear of heights, or they want to get over their pain. They want you to get them there. They don't care how you do it or who you studied with, right? So they're not going to follow any sort of structure that you've imagined will happen and that people who are in the same class as you so obligingly follow. They're going to just be themselves. It's great, and that's really how you learn, is by working with real humans. Not that we're not real humans, but in their natural environment kind of thing. Because they will do unexpected things and have unexpected responses. I remember once working with a woman early on, and I thought I was doing great work because I was doing everything like it said in the textbook kind of thing, and it worked so well in class. And then I said, "So how do you feel?" And she said, I don't feel any different at all. I don't feel anything." I was like, really?
Sure? Are you sure?
Yeah. By the way, that was actually kind of interesting because that happened to me again fairly recently.
Right.
It's one thing to have it happen when you're, just starting out, but I've been doing this for a while now. As I mentioned, I started in '85. How old are you? I've been doing this for a while. And so when it happened recently, I checked, because before I start with a client, I calibrate, their, what Dave Dobson would call their other than conscious communication, their body language, their physiology and their body language kind of stuff. I calibrate where are they, and I get their yeses and their nos, how they unconsciously say yes and how they unconsciously say no, and I check in to find out, how this pattern, this complaint that they have, is being demonstrated. How they move, how they breathe, how or the eye patterns go when they're doing their problem state. And this person who said that she wasn't feeling any changes, wasn't doing her problem state dance anymore. She had changed her physiology, and she was now acting the way that she said that she wanted to be when things were all okay. Because that's the second step, of course, is to find out, what do you want?
Yeah.
And as they describe that, they tend to sort of enact how they would be. So they show the physiology of how they would be when it's done. So I was getting that signal. I was getting, all of the change in physiology that was happening, but she was just sort of saying it wasn't happening. So I said, that's interesting. Here, tell you what, sit down for a second. Sit back, because we were standing up doing an NLP process. I said, sit back down for a second, just close your eyes. Take a deep breath, and let me tell you a story. And I started telling her about a former client of mine who I was, I think, kind of not making up entirely, but kind of putting several people together in one story for her benefit.
Yeah.
And told her this story about a client who had trouble and blah, blah, blah. And in a sense, it was because of that story that she was able to sort of find a place in her conscious mind to let the pattern in, so kind of let it integrate into her that, in fact, a change had been made. And so finally, when she heard enough of the story, I actually went through a couple different versions of it with a couple different clients and anecdotal kind of references, that I saw her finally sort of take this sigh breath, the big automatic breath, and relax down into the chair really deeply. And then I said, that's right. And you can just let that integrate now inside you. And when you're ready, come on back. Take a minute or two of clock time. No hurry. It's when you're ready, come all the way back, and let's just talk about this. And at that point, she said, wow, I don't know what you just did, but yeah, I'm okay. I got it, And she did. It all clicked at that point. So sometimes I think story is really what's so important. That's why Erickson probably told all those stories.
Told of them, and I suppose that comes with that the experience that you're able to draw upon to bring when things like that happen. You can then bring upon stories of past clients to really integrate that.
Well, there's an interesting story about that. Speaking of stories, Dave Dobson was around, and when you hear stories from Richard and from Dave and all those guys, you've got to, I have discovered over the years, you've got to sort of take them with a grain of salt, because they're people, and as any other human on the planet, they've got their own references and points of view, and et cetera, et cetera. But I remember Dave telling me about Richard, and this is just for you and me. Nobody else should know about this. It's just private.
All right.
You and me. Dave Dobson once said that he was teaching, and Richard was in the room. He was maybe teaching for Richard or John or both of them, and telling some stories about his experience as a psychotherapist and dealing with clients. And then the next day or so, soon after that, he heard Richard telling those same stories as if he had done them. And so he took Richard aside at some point later, and he said, now, God, let's just say it this way nicely, gosh darn it, Richard. Dave had an amazing voice and could use it with great effect, very loudly as well, and could be quite intimidating, which is something I think Richard modeled. But gosh darn it, Richard, if you accept that version of the dialogue. If you said, if you want some experience, go get some. Because I think there really is no substitute for experience.
No. Well, from your experience within therapy, then, what have you encountered to be the main things that have hold people back from changing, and kind of what are the most effective things you found, the most effective tools that you found to handle those?
Well, I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, who I've forgotten exactly the context he said, but he told me that he was talking with a friend of his who had been holding on to this issue for quite some time, and in a kind of almost spiritual way, he was asking her. He said, "Well, who would you be if you didn't have that anymore?" And one of the reasons she hadn't changed at all is she really did not know who she was outside of this kind of neurosis that she'd been enacting for years and years. Who would you be if you weren't a musician? Who would you be if you weren't a therapist? Who would you be if you weren't this thing that you think you are, this thing that you do.
Yeah.
And for some people, the thing that they do is neuroses or psychoses. It's this problem that they have. I'm a fuss budget. I'm a person who can't get on a plane. I'm a person who has to be taken care of. Who are you if you're not that anymore?
Right.
And so I think a lot of times what stops people from changing is, in a sense, not knowing how to be other than what they've been. How to act, how to be another person. So what's one of the reasons I think the storytelling is so important, and the meditation, if you will, the guided imagery or hypnosis that you have them go through to sort of, in a sense, future pace and visualize themselves doing things differently in the future. That really allows them to make those changes.
Okay. So you use use a lot of future pacing once you've done all the tools, once you've done all the process, to allow them to step into like the shoes of the person that they can be.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Cool. And what apart from storytelling, is there any other specific tools that you particularly use? Kind of like your bread and butter tools, or is it are you very much a flexible therapist where you can kind of bring in anything that you see fit at the time?
Well, I absolutely am. Well, I like to think that I am that. I do bring in whatever I can. I don't know if many of the people listening have much of a background in EFT, but I think it's mostly placebo effect, frankly. But I'm not averse to using it. And I've used past life regression stuff. I've used whatever seems to be appropriate for the individual I'm talking to. And if it's gonna work, I'll use it. I've used the eye movement stuff with different people. I think what happens with people is that they get stuck in a pattern, and they get into a habit of doing something. I mean, Erickson, when he talked about people's habits of things, said, these are just habits. It's not that you're a bad person. It's not that you have a psychosis or a neurosis or anything like that. You don't have to use these fancy terms. You're a person who's gotten into a habit of behavior. That's what it is, the habit. And we don't need this psychological archaeology of going back into your past, of figuring out how it got that way and why it is that way and blah, blah, blah. You don't need that. What you need to do is interrupt the pattern as it's happening and create new patterns to step into and learn. And you get into a new pattern that becomes just as automatic and just as habitual as the old pattern was. And I'll pretty much do anything to get them. So